Hey there, I'm Andrin Tom, one of the language trainers at Envertiz Academy, and yet again I'm here with the IELTS listening test that we're going to be discussing today. So let's wait for some time for others to join in. Okay, so now of all the 4 modules, the reading and the listening test, it assesses your receptive skills. So the listening test here would be similar for whether be your academic test or the general test, and you have to be answering to 4 parts which would have various audio recordings that you'd be listening to, and the entire test lasts for 30 minutes. Now, you will get a total of 40 questions to answer, wherein the difficulty of the test would progress as it goes beyond. Now, every correct response would get you a point. And now there's this one thing that you have to always make sure that you notice. The entire test duration is only for 30 minutes, as I mentioned earlier. But then again, considering the type of test that you appear for, if it's a paper-based test, you will get 10 minutes additional to transfer your answers. So while you listen to the audio, you would just make markings in the question paper, and later on in the 10 minutes, you're allowed to transfer the answers to the answer sheet. And since you'd be selecting the answers for a computer-based test on the screen, you'll only get 2 minutes to review, okay? And the main thing, you'll only get to hear the entire recording just once. So you have to be extremely careful and attentive while you're preparing for your listening test. And the good side is that we don't have any deductions, so make sure that you attend to as many questions as possible. All right, so that is about the listening test in general. Now, we have various parts, as I already discussed. So let's look at the different parts that we have in the listening test. Now, the first part of your listening test is a conversation that you hear between 2 people. So it can be a telephonic conversation or a face-to-face conversation, and it would be relating to any everyday topic. And coming to the second part of your test, that would be a monologue that you listen to where only one person speaks, and that again would be similarly a everyday topic. Say for example, a person is describing the working of a machine, or maybe a person is explaining the duties to maybe a set of interns, okay? And coming to the part 3, you would be again listening to a conversation between 2 people. Now this section or the part 3 and 4 here are academic topics that you're going to be listening to. So mostly you'd listen to maybe 2 students engaged in a conversation, or a student and a professor engaged in a conversation. Coming to part 4, here you'd have a monologue again. Now this one would mostly be a lecture that you listen to. So these are the 4 parts that we have in the listening test. And now we have certain number of questions. So the type of questions that we have in here are fill in the blanks, multiple choice questions, labeling maps, and matching the information. So now we'll speak in particular about each of the question type. So coming to the first particular question over here, we have the fill in the blanks. Now you'd find this particular question in the first part and also in the 4th part. Now you will always come across instructions that you need to be following every time you appear for your test. Now whether be listening or reading or writing, you have set like a set instruction that you need to follow while attending the test. So here you'll always find that you're required to write 1 word and or a number. So the allowed responses are a single word, just a number, or maybe a word and a number. Now you'd find more words or more number of words in reading alone. So mostly in listening, we only have 1 word and or a number possibility. Now you'd find fill in the gaps, as I mentioned, in the first part and in the 4th part. So here on the screen, you'll see the question which is in the first part of your test. Now you can see that you are supposed to be completing a form here. So fill-ups mostly would be either a form completion, a table completion, or a note completion. So we have a form completion here, and we also have the instruction below that. Now you'll also find that there's an example done for you. This used to be done earlier, but I think from the past few years, we don't have it, that they given examples for us. Okay, so we'd follow the same pattern like we did in the reading. So once you get your question, you have to always make sure that you utilize the time that is given to you for reading the question. So every time before you listen to the audio, you have a set of preparation time, like you get 30 to 35 seconds of time to prepare or read through your questions, and only then they'll begin the audio. So make sure that you utilize that amount of time very well in order to understand what your questions are, mark the keywords, and then by the time the audio starts, you're ready to go with it. Okay, so here we have a form that we need to be completing, and the first blank comes with asking the nationality of the particular person. Now, so I would mark nationality as my keyword, and then when the audio starts, I'll particularly look for this, like try to listen for this particular word, or you can even expect paraphrases. Now, as I mentioned in the reading test, that we do have like we should be considering the entire test as a vocabulary test. Okay, so we should be expecting them to give paraphrases or synonyms to the words that they use in the question, and never expect them to be always giving the same words. Okay, so the word nationality can be replaced by a different word which means exactly the same. So now I have the transcript for the same. So in the first few days, like initially when you practice, you'd find it hard to understand the audio, but then again you can practice with the transcript in order to understand the pronunciations better. So here the audio would be a conversation, as I told you, between two people. So Luis says, I want to report a theft. I had something stolen out of my bag yesterday. And then the officer says, I'm sorry to hear that, right? So I'll need to take a few details. Can I start with your name? So since an example is done, we just skip that part and go further. So Luis says, my name is Luis Taylor. And then the officer again asks, okay, thank you. And are you a resident in the UK? So the part where he asks, are you a resident in the UK? Ask for the nationality of the person. So here, now, whatever response that follows, I should be alert at this point because I did mark nationality as my keyword, and I should expect my answer anytime now. So Louis says, no, I'm actually Canadian, though my mother was British. Now, every time you do your listening, always make sure that you be aware of the fact that they would give you distractors as well. So though he says that I am Canadian, they did try to distract you with the part that his mother is British. Well, my answer for this section would be that Canadian is what he is the nationality that we belongs to, and not British. So make sure that you always be very attentive of whatever keywords you've marked, because that would get you to your answer, and at the same time try to minus out all the distractors. Okay, so that's about filling the blanks in the first part. Now here I've given you part 4, where, as I told you, we again listen to a monologue, wherein here you're required to again complete a note. So now the thing about section 4 or the part 4 is that you will have questions 31 to 40 at a full stretch. Now the main thing that comes in here is that when you get a whole number of questions to look at, like close to 10 questions you need to be reading within the 30 seconds that is given to you for the preparation, it is not very easy, I would say. It does stress you out a lot. But what you can be doing is, you'd always find that once your session ends, like once the part 1 ends, they would give you some time to review your answers. You can utilize that particular time to again read the questions in the next section. And then you'd get close to 30 seconds there, and again when they begin the next session, you again get the 30 seconds there. So altogether you can be utilizing 1 minute to just read your questions. Okay, and it won't be a problem if you switch between the tests. Like once the test begins, you can easily move through the questions. So whenever I do part 4, as soon as my part 3 is completed, I'd make sure I won't spend any time there, because now once the audio is done, there's no point looking at my answers and waiting there. So I'll just immediately go to the section 4. I start reading my questions there, and by the time the audio starts, I would probably have completed everything there. Okay, now coming to section 4 here, you are supposed to be completing a note. Here again, you have the instruction, write one word only. And again, as usual, while we're reading through, we'll start marking the keywords. So here in the introduction for marine renewable energy or the ocean energy, I've marked the keywords that more energy is required because of growth in population and something. That's the blank there. So we need more energy, and this is due to one reason being the growth in population, and we need to find out what the second reason is. So when the audio plays, you listen to something like this. Producing enough energy to meet our needs has become a serious problem. Demand is rising rapidly because of the world's increasing population and expanding industry. And then the audio would continue again. So now the moment you hear demand is rising, that was exactly the phrase with more energy was required, and they did mention increasing population, which is a synonym, a paraphrased form to growth in population. And you also have the second part that was mentioned as expanding industry. So all you need to do is just fill in one word. So I won't be writing expanding there, I just simply write growth, which relates to the meaning expand. I would just write industry there, okay, in my blank. There's one more that we'll just try doing. So the next blank is 32, and just right before that you'd see wave energy as a heading. So I'd maybe not listen to every conversation happening there. I'd try to look at the subheadings as well, so as to just focus on what is necessary. So after a few exchanges there, after a few more things that the person conveys, then he starts with first wave energy. So there now he's switching the topic. So the question says advantage, waves provide a dash source of renewable energy. So it is a source of energy, but then again, what kind of source? That's some description they're using there, some adjective probably. So the audio says, first, wave energy. Numerous devices have been invented to harvest wave energy with names such as wave dragon, the penguin, and mighty whale. And research is going on to try and come up with really efficient method. This form of energy has plenty of potential as the source is constant. So now they're saying that the source is constant, and that is where I would stop, because the renewable energy that they're speaking of, that has an advantage, and that is that it is a very constant or a regular supply. So the word constant is what I hear in my audio, and that I would exactly fill in the blank over there. So this is how you solve the fill in the blank questions, and these are relatively simple questions, but then as I told you, the kind of question that you find in the first part might not be of the same level that you find in the last part, because the last part being a continuous audio, it might be a little confusing for you to concentrate and also work on. So particularly do work on where you feel that you need to be like bettering yourself. Now that was about filling the blanks. Moving on to the second type of question, we have solving the maps. Now solving the maps, now this is definitely a hard nut to crack, because a map can often be confusing. Now, if you are someone who travels a lot, you'd often use Google Maps, right? But then you know how confusing it is. So the same thing happens here when you do your listening to. You should be aware of the directions, you should be aware of the intercardinal directions as well, and also of the various places that are mentioned there. So every time you get a map question, make sure before you even listen to the audio, what you need to be doing first is, once you get your picture there, make sure you are aware of what the directions are, the left, the right, and also try to look at all the places that are already mentioned, wherever the blanks are to be required, and also what your questions are. And the good side is that they always follow an order, so you don't have to be worried about where they would start. And make sure you also mark where the starting point is, because every map would have a starting point from where they start talking to, and then they further move on from one place to the other. And what you're supposed to be doing is, you have to be labeling certain places that are mentioned. So here my question says that I'm supposed to be labeling the starting point for the walking, and then where the bow and arrow display is. So like that it goes. So now again we have instructions here. So we are supposed to be labeling the plan below. Now the plan is of Branley Castle, and you have to be writing the correct letter in the blanks given, or like in your answer sheet. So the letter would be A to H, which is marked in the picture, and all you need to do is, wherever the particular letter is, like where the starting point is, the corresponding letter needs to be written there. Now let's try doing it. Now here again I would say you have to be like aware of the fact that they would use distractors again. They would not just right away say, okay, this is the place. They describe it in a way that can be a little confusing. So let's listen, let's look into how the transcript would go for this particular picture. So now if you take a look at your plans, you'll see Branley Castle has 4 towers joined together by a high wall with the river on 2 sides. So that's an entire description. And then don't miss seeing the Great Hall that's near the river. So then from that point, they're just directly jumping into the Great Hall and the river. So you're constantly going to different places. You'll be distracted going here and there, but make sure you be at the starting point. Now, in the main tower, the biggest one, which was extended and redesigned in the 18th century. If you want to get a good view of the whole castle, you can walk around the walls. The starting point's quite near. So once I see the word, the starting point, which I did mark as my keyword here, I should be aware that now they're going to speak about the 16th blank. Now, let's just look at that part again. So if you want to get a good view of the whole castle, you can walk around the walls. The starting point's quite near the main entrance. So now, every time you're doing this, make sure you maybe place your pencil or your hand at that particular spot that they're speaking and then move along with them. So the main entrance, I'd be there and walk straight down the path until you get to the south gate. So now when they say walk straight down the path, it doesn't mean that you have to be walking downwards. So you just have to walk straight, and I'd walk straight, like the straight path to the south gate, and then it's just there. So the only place close to the south gate is H. So I'll just write H close to the 16th blank. Yeah, so it just looks easy, but then that gets better with practice, I would say. So further, the next blank says bow and arrow display. Now they won't wait for you to read the next questions. Obviously, the audio would go on. So there'll shortly be a show in which you can see archers displaying their skill with a bow and arrow. So the moment I say, like I listen to bow and arrow, I should be aware that now they're going to speak about this. The quickest way to get there is to take the first left after the main entrance. So now if you see from the main entrance, we have a left and a right. So they just say that you have to go through a first left. So I take the first left there and follow the path past the bridge. So I need to be going where the bridge is. So I follow that path, and when they say past the bridge, it means that you don't have to be crossing the bridge, you just need to be moving or passing by it, okay, passing by the side of it. So you can say that it's right in front of you at the end. So the only place around that place is like D, so you'd mark D for bow and arrow display. Now this is how you do a map, and to do a map, as I told you, you need to be very well aware of where your left is, where the right is, and what north, south, west and east are. So always you'll be given a map, and along with that you'll also have the directions mentioned. So make sure you see that, and you should be aware of where the different places are. So you should be knowing where the bridge is, you should be knowing where the river is, where the north gate is, like according to the diagram that is given to you. You should be aware of the places given, only then you'll be able to move easily through that. So that's about solving maps. Now moving on to the next question type, we have solving MCQs. Now solving MCQs, there are 2 types of MCQ questions that you get in over here. So the one type that you would have is probably with 3 to 4 options, and you need to be selecting one answer. And the second type is you would have 5 options where you need to be selecting 2 answers. So this is the first type, and we'll discuss that first. So when you get an MCQ, you have a question with 3 to 4 possible answers, and definitely an MCQ does have a lot of distractors. They might mention all the 3 options and you need to be selecting one out of it. And now while we're doing reading, it's much more easier. We can like underline and everything, but when you're doing listening, you have to be extra attentive there in order to rule out what the wrong options are and focus on for the right option. So whenever you're doing the MCQ, you have to be choosing the right letter, A, B or C, and mostly you find MCQ questions in the second and the third section. Okay, so here the first question says, before Queen Elizabeth I visited the castle in 1576, and then there are the options. So they did carry out repairs in the guest room, and second one says a new building was constructed for her, and the third one is that there was a fire that damaged the main hall. So they are again describing of the Branley Castle, and I just read the part where they're speaking about Queen Elizabeth's visit. So however, when Queen Elizabeth I announced that she was going to visit the castle in 1576. The moment you hear these words, you should know that you are at the 11th question there. And it was beginning to look like a bit run down. It was decided that rather than repair the guest rooms, they'd make a new house for her out of wood next to the main hall. So there, though they did mention the repair guest rooms part, they're saying rather than this, they prefer doing something else. So at that point, I should understand that they're not going to repair it. So the moment you realize that that's not your option, strike it out. And then what they're saying is they're going to be making a new house for her. So that is what the second option means. Now, though they did mention my answer, I would still wait for the audio to end, because they can again make changes there. Okay, so do expect them to make changes whenever it's an MCQ. All the three options can be mentioned. So here, further, if I continue listening to the audio, they'd say she stayed there for 4 nights, and apparently it was a very luxurious, but unfortunately, it was destroyed a few years later by fire. So they did mention about the fire as well, but then, yeah, that's a later option. So this was something that happened before she visited. So if you see, my option B is the right answer, because A and C do not fall in accordance to what the audio says. So that's how you do an MCQ. You should be aware of what the options are. You should be marking the right keywords in order to identify them from the audio that you listen to. Again, do expect paraphrases there. And once you figure out what your options are, and when you start listening to them, make sure you cancel out the wrong options and then get to your right answer. Okay, so let's go in for a break, and then we'll continue with the rest of the sessions. So welcome back. So before the break, we spoke about solving MCQs, which was one type of an MCQ that we saw. That was wherein you get 3 to 4 options, and then you have to be marking one response. Now let's discuss about the other MCQ type of question that we get on over here, wherein you might get close to 5 options and you need to be selecting any 2 out of it, whichever suits the best. Okay, so here you can see that on the screen you have questions 21 and 22, where you need to be selecting 2 letters as your responses. And now the question says, which 2 parts of the introductory stage to their art projects do Jess and Tom agree were useful? Now this would normally come where you get part 3 in your test. So you would be listening to conversations where 2 students are involved, or a student and a professor speak. So in this particular section, now this is one question type that I find very difficult, because you often would find people arguing, or maybe they are agreeing to a point. So you have to be very mindful of what the question is, and not just this type. The previous question we mentioned also can have the same sort. Okay, can be of the same sort. So the thing that you have to always remember is make sure you read the question very thoroughly, understand what it is asking you for. So are they saying whether if both of the speakers agree to it, or are they saying if only one speaker agrees to it? So make sure you go in that very detail in order to get to your answer. So now here we have 5 options: the bird park visit, the workshop sessions, the natural history museum visit, the projects done in previous years, the handouts with research sources. So out of these 5 options, when I listen to my particular audio, I have to be figuring out what both of them found useful while preparing for their beginning of the while preparing for the initial part of their art project. So when you listen to the audio, you will be listening to probably all the options. We'll again go with the same approach, wherein we rule out the wrong ones and we mark every answer that we feel is right. So when you listen to the respective audio, you'd listen to Jess speaking first, wherein he asked, how are you getting on with your art project, Tom? And Tom says, okay, like they gave us the theme of birds to base our projects on, and I'm not really all that interested in wildlife, but I'm starting to get into it. I pretty well finished the introductory stage. So they did mention introductory stage, which indicates that now they're going to be speaking about question number 21 and 22. And now when you mark your answers also, you can be writing in any order. So for 21 you can mark one answer, and for 22 you can mark the other one. So now getting back to the audio, so Jess continues, so have I well, they gave us all those handouts with details of books and websites to look at. It was really put off, but the more I read, the more interested I got. So Jess says that although he wasn't very happy with that part, but he did find that better, like useful. Now Tom says, me too. So there you can see both of them agreeing to it. So what you're going to be doing is you'll mark E as your response. Now we'll continue to listen to it because we still have one more answer to get to and we have 4 more options left. So continuing with the audio, Tom says, me too. I found I could research so many different aspects of birds in art, color, movement, texture. So I was looking forward to the bird park visit. Now see, from option E they directly jumped to option A. So they can switch like from options, like in between options. So you have to always make sure that you figure out that you're not figure out, I would say you should be aware of what your keywords are, otherwise it can be confusing. Now Jess continues, what a letdown, it poured with rain and we hardly saw a single bird. So basically Tom was saying that he did look forward to visiting the bird park, but they didn't go, is what he sounds from there. And Jess says, yeah, it was a letdown, it wasn't good enough because for the reason that it started raining and we couldn't see any birds. So bird park visit wasn't a good option there. So yeah, we'll just strike it out. And moving on further, Jess continues by saying, much less use than the trip to the Natural History Museum, where he says that yeah, the bird park visit was not at all good and it was very less when compared to Natural History Museum. So Natural History Museum is something he believes was good there. So Tom again says, yeah, I liked all the stuff about evolution there. So again, both of them are agreeing to Natural History Museum being a good source. So we'd mark that one. Now since we already have 2 answers, you can just be with it. Or if you still wish to confirm, you can just go on, listen to the rest of the part, like concentrate listening to the rest of the part. So you'd see Tom continues by saying the workshop sessions with Dr. Fletcher were good too, especially the brainstorming sessions, but Jess says I missed those. So yeah, only one person finds it useful. And again, Jess was saying, I wish if I could see the last year projects, but then Tom also says like we're not supposed to copy there. So basically the workshop and the projects can be ruled out because either only one person agrees to it or the other one is not even valid there. So we already have 2 marked responses there. They did speak about the handouts and also they spoke about the Natural History Museum visit, which they found useful for their art project, and both of them were agreeing to it. So those would be my responses there. So this is how you do an MCQ. Now whenever you're doing an MCQ, always remember that your MCQ, now you might get small options and also longer options. So if it's a small option, do expect them to use paraphrases. If it's a longer option, yeah, expect both of it. Like they can give the exact same thing or they can use paraphrases. But overall, I would say a listening test will often test your vocabulary in every way possible. So do work on your vocabulary during your practice time. Now let's move on to the last question type that we have here, which is solving matching the information. Now matching the information is where you are given a list of opinions or options and you need to be matching it up with the questions given to you. So here you are given opinions that the students gave about each module during their veterinary science course. So you have option A, B, C, D, E and F for questions 27 to 30. So the best side about the listening test is that it always goes in an order. Now the options would vary, like it doesn't follow proper order. The questions would always follow an order, so you can be concentrating on that. And say you just miss question number 27, you can just skip that and move to the question number 28. If you mark the right keywords, you know where to concentrate on. Okay, so now coming back to this thing, so always know that this particular section requires you to match the information. So anything that they speak about the medical terminology, out of the options I need to be selecting. Now in order to do that, you have to again utilize the time given for reading the questions very well, because here you might get again long and short options. So when you get your option, you mark the right keyword and try to memorize as much as possible. Now for a person who's attending a paper test, it would be easy to mark, but when you go for a computer based test, you have to be memorizing it. So yeah, anyway, as I did mention earlier, it all gets better when you practice more. So here you'd see the first option says it was easier than expected. Now all the minute words again, like Tim said so, Diana said so, you have to be marking these two, because you never know if the same person is again speaking the audio about the same thing. Okay, so Tim says that it was easier than expected. Then Tim again says that it was not very well organized. And the third option says Diana might do some further study on it. And then the fourth option says both of them found the reading part that required for their particular course was very difficult. And the option E says Tim was shocked about something that he learned. And F says both of them were surprised how little was known about certain things regarding the topic that they're talking about. Now, the first question is about medical terminology. So now once you listen to the audio, once you start listening to the audio, you should be probably looking for this particular word, and anytime that they mention that is where your answer might start nearing you. Okay, so Diana says, now we've got to give a bit of feedback about last term's modules. Just short comments apparently. Shall we do that now? So Tim says, okay, so medical terminology. So they're starting with medical terminology there. And then Diana continues by saying, well, my heart sank when I saw that, especially right at the beginning of the course, and I did struggle with it. So Tim says, I thought it'd be hard, but actually I found it all quite straightforward. So it was Tim's opinion that he did feel like it was very difficult, but then it turned out to be easy. So I do see that option in A. So I'd mark that as my answer there. Okay. And moving on further, Tim continues by saying, what do you think about diet and nutrition? Which again, my question number 28 is. So there, if I try to focus on that, so Diana says that it was okay. She feels like it was okay. And Tim says, do you remember what they told us about pet food and the fact that there's such limited checking into whether or not it's contaminated? I mean, in comparison with the checks on food for humans, I thought that was terrible. So this was again something that Tim shared. Now we have certain options that Tim did say. So it's B and E that we need to be comparing from. So in B it says it's not well organized, whereas E says Tim was shocked about something that he learned about this. So which we did hear in the audio. If you see the audio would, like if you listen, like once you listen to the audio, you'd realize that it did say that it was a limited checking into whether it was contaminated or not. And I mean in comparison with the checks on humans. So pet food is not compared, like it was not assessed better is what they're talking about. So that was something shocking for Tim, and that is what he's saying here. So I'd mark E as my response there. So that's how you do a solving, that's how you solve a matching information question. Now, these are the 4 question types as I mentioned in the listening test, and I'll just tell you once again wherein you find these questions. So in part 1 and part 4, you would find fill in the blanks mostly. So it can be a table, or it can be a note, or it can be a flow chart that you need to be completing. And mostly in part B and C, you would find these MCQs and maps and matching the information questions. Okay, so basically always remember a few things. Now I'll just summarize the whole content. So always remember that whenever you appear for your listening test, know that it's a fast-paced test and you have to be clearly reading your questions and whatever the options are given in order to get to your answer better. And often it comes in an order, and you should be aware of the fact that they would give in distractors, they would use paraphrasings, and if at all you miss a question, that's completely normal. And the audio, since it doesn't wait for you, there's no point of you waiting there. Immediately move to the next question and then rule out any wrong options if in case of MCQs. And yeah, the basic thing, you have to always remember that your spellings do count here. So whether be the American or the British spelling that you're going to be using, you have to make sure you write the right spelling to get your score there. And so when you get your answers, you initially fill them in your question paper and later on you transfer them to the answer sheet. So while you're doing that, you can be using a pencil here, and also make sure now there might be answers where you're writing a person's name or maybe a place's name, and then certain people forget to write the first letter in capital. So in order to avoid that problem, you can write all the answers, like the entire answer, in block letters, which is easier. And also if in case you're having a problem with your handwriting, if you find that your handwriting is not good enough, you can be using this thing again, because that solves a lot of your problems there. So that's about the tip. Now this is a quick thing. Again, listening test is pretty intense, though a lot of people say that it is very difficult. I would say that if you get the right amount of practice and if you follow the right strategies, you'd be able to tackle and get a good score there. And all you need to do over here is practice multitasking. So basically you're reading your question, you're listening to the audio, and you're writing your responses as well. So you just need to better yourself there and you're good to go. So drop in your questions in the comment box, and thank you for watching.